locked in. And bit by bit, this modestly told little film engaged me to the point where I surprised myself. It brought tears to my eyes in a couple of places. So we'll talk about those, not just because I did, but I suspect a lot of you were affected. But this film shows that it doesn't take all the bells and whistles of filmmaking to reach an audience. It's like because you get people where they live, they're with you in a big way, and they're open to what you're trying to do as a filmmaker and receptive. And um, he actually meant us to feel the things we felt when we watched this movie. It's a very successful film. A little bit about Ken Loach. He's a colleague of Mike Lee's, both British directors, and they're in this school of neo-realist working class dramas. We saw uh, Promises and Lies. Yeah, no, Secrets and Lies, about the adoptive daughter who finds her mother of a different race. Great movie, really great. Brenda Blethyn won an Oscar for that. And Ken Loach, you may not have seen him. I don't think we've programmed one of his films. He does working class dramas, usually about men who are out of work, and the burdens and the effects of that on their lives. And he did one a couple of years ago. I can't remember the title of it. He did one about a guy, a pensioner who can't get any resolution from the security, his Social Security, the equivalent of it, and is fighting with the post office. Really compassionate film, very tough film to watch because it has an unhappy ending. But these guys are really conscientious, simple storytellers. You know, they have a feel. Now, I don't know how long Ken Loach worked with his actors the way Mike Lee worked for 6 months with the mother and the daughter actors, and they never met each other until the first day on the set. So, that's pretty dramatic, and nobody does it like him. But the writer of this film, I didn't get to look him up, but I know he's the longtime writer of Ken Loach screenplays. So this is a well-practiced team, very sure-handed. And without cutting to the chase, did anybody here get taken by surprise at how this movie affected them? Barbara, shaking your head is not enough. I actually see that.
I was so touched. I was in tears. That doesn't happen often. I thought the acting was, they felt so much, they felt so real. They were like part of my living room. And I just thought it was an engaging, touching,
Uh-huh.
significant movie. And about right now, it feels like it was,
Sure, the
you know,
immigrant crisis, and we'll talk about those moments where they come together or the mistrust that
it's
made it
fabulous.
necessary. It's like it follows a playbook that we've seen time and time again, especially in the immigration disputes we're having today and in the Jewish Palestinian disputes we're having today. Um, Doris, what was your first reaction to the film? You're muted, dear. Lower left corner. Can't see. You're still muted. The microphone on the lower left corner. Okay. When you find that, we'll be able to hear you. Jeffrey, I know you can unmute.
I think
Yeah,
I've muted
Oh,
it now.
okay. Let's let Doris did it.
All
Okay.
what I wanted to say, Jim, was that I had very big difficulty understanding them. I don't know if anybody else had that same problem, but it was very, very,
They may have
very hard to understand them.
most of these films have subtitles.
I
You
had
just
it,
you just have to go to the icon. Can somebody mute themselves where that background noise is coming from? Um, and the subtitles will pop up in English or Czech or Spanish if you want. And it's good to do that. I know my wife and I use the subtitles a lot, and it does make a difference because you feel lost. But did you empathize with the characters anyway, Doris? Oops, we lost you again. We lost you, Doris. Can't hear you. Jeff, why don't you chime in?
I think what surprised me about the film is that I recognize those guys as racist and xenophobic, and yet as I listened to their stories about their lives, I felt a certain compassion for them and understood why it is that they had to have a scapegoat, namely the refugees.
Yeah.
Um, so
So when you're down, you need somebody to look down on so you don't feel like you're in the worst possible situation.
right.
Very common.
And I thought that the one character, the man,
Charlie?
the one of the guy, the first one that we met, the tall blonde-haired guy, who was found out that his house was not worth what it was.
Yeah, that's Charlie with the
Yeah,
wife in the
Charlie.
wheelchair.
And to go through his evolution in the film, I found that fascinating. His changes,
I mean, his escalation to
his escalation, but then doesn't he appear at the very end at the funeral?
yes, he does, but he doesn't
Oh,
quite step forward to
right.
kill the widow. But
But
you're right. He's a typical story, and there are many typical stories here. You know, the guys at the bar who just insist on berating TJ, you know, and they all resent the gathering that they had for both British and Syrians to feed them, and they were all hungry. But I don't want to chime in too much. Martha, do you want to chime in now, or you want to wait?
Well, I thought I'd mostly listen tonight because
Okay,
there's a lot of
we'll
things.
come back to you.
I was going to say what he said about the scapegoating. In our book club, we read a book called Caste, and that was one of the major points that the caste system and everything else, and they studied 3 different ones. One
Yeah.
was India, obviously. One was here in the United States, but you had to have a scapegoat. Everybody, however low they are, has to have someone below them. I liked the movie very much. I had I not read your little blurb, I was semi-worried through the whole thing that something awful was going to happen.
Well, something awful does happen, but it's
well, yes, but I mean, you said that, things don't get terrible. It just when the little girl got the bike, I was sure they were going to steal her bike. When, everything that happened, I could see a disaster.
okay. It put you on alert because you realize, oh,
Yes.
I recognize this bias.
Yes,
Fern?
and
I thought it was interesting that I thought it was going to be, and probably because you said so, but also just the setup that it was somehow going to emerge a feel-good ending. But the interesting part was it wasn't simply feel-good because the one you thought, that should be the hero, but that everybody became human and understandable, if not forgivable, certainly understandable. And there was a way to for a rapprochement with all sides, and they didn't have clear villains as they were set up initially.
Right. I'm so glad you mentioned that because that's really the major accomplishment of the film. We'll go back to the ending later, and we'll talk about those moments when they inch closer together. Cindy, any comments?
Yeah, I mean, the meanness really affected me, not so much to tears, but just cringing,
Yeah.
And how horrible. I really did expect the kumbaya moment at the end, but I really appreciated the casting. That so many movies, everybody is so beautiful and thin, and these people just really looked real for what a small village in poverty would have.
Yeah. That's actually one of its secrets, is that just because they're ordinary people doesn't mean their dramas aren't as compelling as Tom Cruise's. It doesn't take a fiction to tell a really good story of pain and loss and damage and retribution and some kind of resolution. It is a success. Joel, do you have any comments? Natalie, you're next.
Well, I was thinking, every immigrant story is a repeat of every immigrant story of the Jews coming to the Lower East Side, the Italians to the Lower East Side, and our South, the immigrants from the south of the border who do come here and contribute. if given a chance. Not everybody is great, but the immigrants have to be given a chance. But our society, going way back, does not want to give the new people a chance. And you can see in this small little milieu of this village that once they realize that the immigrants aren't so bad and we can work together, it works. But it was kind of a feel-good ending,
It was, but it wasn't cheesy, and it wasn't cheap. It really earned it. I think that's what I liked about it. I thought, oh, this is just a feel-good movie the first time I saw it. I felt good and kind of weepy at the end, but I said, oh, it's too simple for the group. And no, in thinking about it, I think there's meat on those bones. The bones may show through the skin, but there's real substance here. That's what I meant. Natalie, lower left, unmute, please.
I thought it was oh my God, here. I thought it was a moving, sweet fairy tale. It was a fairy tale from the beginning to the end. There were so many ridiculous things in it. For example, here were these immigrant people who came. They're bringing in furniture for them. They feel so sorry for them. Then the mother-in-law comes out with her beautiful tea set and serving dishes that, fleeing from where they fled, there was time to take all these beautiful dishes. And the daughter had all these, every time you saw her was in a different outfit, different blouse, different clothes. There were so many things that didn't fit into the actual immigrant situation, that they were giving food to that lovely man. Oh, that was nice. But they weren't supposed to have too much food even for their family. I mean, that was the way I read the film. And there was one scene that to me was very important that they put in, and that was where the two dogs, where the main character has his little dog, his little black dog, and he runs away, and this big, mean white dog goes and destroys him. So to me, that was a very poignant part of the film, which really meant what is in real life, that the strong win, the most strong win in wars, in life, in politics, in everything. That mean, horrible dog killed his dog because he was bigger and stronger. And none of that was carried out totally through the rest of the film. So I wondered why they put that scene in to begin with.
Okay.
Aside from the fact that he was so upset about his dog, it almost did him in.
Well, we learn after the dog is killed what the remorse is and the backstory. The dog is connected to his own suicide attempt.
That is correct.
Saves him from suicide. So that's a really meaningful animal to do that. And it was devastating, and rightfully so. The guy's alone, so his pet becomes his emotional touchstone. I want to say this about the tea set. I'm glad you mentioned it. It is a lovely tea set, but you have to understand, and I'm sure you do, that the tea service in other cultures is a very special event. They invite him in the first time as a thank you for his kindness, with the camera. And it's like if you were being ripped from, Odessa or any of the, Holocaust beleaguered countries, what do you take with you? You take with you what's most important. And that tea set, I believe, is a symbol of community. And Yara, the young girl, says that sometimes I miss community. That's what we don't have here and we had back home. So it's not a sign of prosperity. It's a sign of we don't have much, but we have what's really important in life, which is to share thanks with people. That's my take on it. You're entitled to your opinion. But that's a very important thing in so many cultures, just in America where we just say, thanks a lot for returning my dog. We don't say, do you want to come in for a beer? Or, we come in and watch, Jeopardy with me. We don't do that. It's like we're very emotional and outgoing people when it comes to the deep stuff, especially the men, excuse me, guys. We're not that expressive. It's not manly, you know. So I'm just going around the clock here. So next is Betty.
Um, well, I liked it. I'm not sure I have that much to add to what everybody else said, but I I did like it a lot.
Okay, good. Well, if there's a scene that comes up that particularly resonates with you, please chime back in. Arlene, what's
Yes,
your take on it?
hi. I liked the film a lot. It was interesting to me how the townspeople who knew each other well were turning on him, Valentine.
Mhm.
And there was like no feeling that they were hurting him. They all felt that he owed them the use of their facility. I was angry at them for not really valuing Valentine and what he was doing, while the immigrants really were. It was, I thought, quite interesting. And I was tearful at the end when the people started showing up en masse.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah, I thought that was a
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful
Well,
resolution.
you put your finger on an issue, and that is jealousy. The white guys at the bar, it was their hangout, and intruders came and upset the balance, the milieu. It was no longer their living room that they couldn't entertain each other in because it was too small. The pub is very important in rural life, still is. Yeah, don't say rural, it's a small village though. And it's like the teacups for the Syrians. It's like, this is my community in the pub. So don't fuck with me. Don't fuck with it. And yes, we've been coming here for 40 years, so you owe us. It's their pub, you see, even though he has scraped and saved and gone without through the very hard times. He's barely made it. And that's why he closed the back room, because he couldn't afford the insurance, which comes back to bite him. So it's like we have a habit, human beings have a habit of not seeing things from the other's point of view.
Jim, I had my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Judy. We're going around the
I
clock.
wanted to make a comment. Somebody referred briefly to the loss of value of the homes. And they blamed it on the immigrants.
Uh-huh.
And it reminded me of back in the 1960s when I lived on the south side of Chicago. And suddenly the neighborhood changed from primarily white and Jewish to black in a couple of years. And we were the last house on the block to stay, and we lost a lot of money. And I don't know if my parents resented or blamed African Americans or just the circumstances, but I kind of could relate to what they were saying because I remembered this. I mean, who loses money on real estate? My family.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there were people, people who tried to sell in 1988 during that real estate crash.
True.
People tried to sell in 2008. And even today, people are afraid to sell because they have old mortgages at 3.5%. And then
But that is not, that's like the economy. This was different. This was one group being replaced by another group. And there was a lot of resentment.
Of course there was. It's like, not only did they invade my bar, my pub, they made my apartment worthless. And if you notice, this is a coal mining town where the working class lived in all those two-story townhouses, attached brick structures, right? That's how they all lived. So everybody in that group, he drops the bomb when he said, I paid 40,000 for it, and now those out of towners are paying 5.
Yeah.
And that rallies the group. That's one of the escalators in the film. Fern, be right back with you. It's one of the escalators where each of the guys ramps up the other ones, till they're frothing with anger. It's how it happens, and there's no examination of why or how, there's no thirst for details or other explanations. It's just whatever occurs to them, and that also is very much a part of human nature and a product of how our schools have failed us because people don't know how to investigate or see things from more angles than one. Fern, let me go to the others and I'll come back to you first.
Yeah, I just had one sentence that I wanted to say. It just reminds me of the Jews will not replace us.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And it also reminds me of the redlining where white banks wouldn't loan mortgages to black people in certain areas. Rule illegal now. You don't know how much it's still going on. There's a way to veil your negation of a mortgage. You can find any number of things. Marina, yeah.
I'd like to specify that the immigrants are not owning the property. Somebody from offshore bought the property and is renting it to the immigrants. Probably it is being paid by government money because they're refugees.
Right.
So the immigrants are not lowering the prices. It is a different story, not the one that Judy's family lived through.
It's a good
The
point.
prices went down because the mines closed.
Right.
The economy changed.
Yeah.
The employment is close to zero, and the buying capacity, the environment is different. So he's complaining overall, not in particular about these immigrants.
Right. But people mistake the part for the whole.
Yes.
The immigrants are in front of him, but the real problem is the economy and the people with money offshore. And by the way, Cyprus is almost in the Middle East. I won't go further with it than that. And
Russian oligarchs have money in Cyprus.
So when it comes to this point, this kind of exploitation, no culture or ethnicity is immune. There are people with money all over the world who will happily dive into the situation and not think about the social consequences.
If I may also mention that we came here from Odessa that you mentioned as political refugees. We were allowed 2 suitcases and $500 each. And I did bring my grandmother's crystal vase because I wanted something to remind me of her and something beautiful from home that I can look at.
Right. Totally understandable and sweet. Jeffrey and then Risa, sorry.
I want to come back to the tea set.
Yeah.
Because I haven't been in too many Muslim homes. But when I have, tea, especially in the Middle East, tea is there's a connection to it to home. Because there's this notion that as long as we have tea together and you're under my roof, you are protected. You are one. And I think that connection was not just to really community, but to home in a broader sense. And I thought that one of the things that the film was sort of saying was that workers are kind of foolish in the sense that they create this tribal divisions, when in reality, those who are living in the town were not much better off than the refugees. Part of their jealousy is because they were hungry and they had no food in their homes. And we see that when she goes to open the refrigerator and the cupboards, there's nothing there. So there really should be a sense of solidarity. between the working people, rather than the development of factions, because they have more in common than they do different.
Right.
And I thought, last of all, that the scene with Mara talking with him one-to-one was
With Yara
was with Yara was
at the kitchen table. Yeah.
at the kitchen table.
Yeah.
That's when we really began to understand him,
Mhm.
and what he's been through.
Yeah, he shares his life with her, and that's a bonding experience. It's not like cleaning up the kitchen. It's like he's telling her something very personal about his attempted suicide and the meaning of the dog to his life. And remember, the dog kind of equates to her camera. It's her connection to what gives her hope and meaning, just like the dog gave his life meaning. I didn't realize that when I first saw it.
And I think he understood that because right at the outset, he offered to fix her camera.
Yeah, well, he felt sorry, it's a sign he's a mensch, how do I repair this horrible greeting this thug has given her, this bully. And she says no at first, but then he figures out a way to fix it, by selling his uncle's camera. And that camera took those pictures, and the pictures are a link. Um, I don't want to talk about the slideshow just yet, but clearly she's very moved when she's studying the photos on the wall in the back room. And you see it in her face. I mean, the filmmaker is telling us through performance. She's saddened by it, but also fascinated. And she feels in the oppression of the miners from 1984, the oppression of her own people in Syria. So again, there's this media pictures have a way of breaking down those barriers and making feel. I recognize the humanity in that. Risa, did you want to say something?
A universal story. And I just kept thinking about all immigrants that come into a community anywhere, and that we're all a little guilty of when people come into our neighborhood and change the neighborhood. And it's not necessarily xenophobia, although in this case they set it up as xenophobia. It's even if it's our own people of well, I guess even a different economic background, something you don't understand. Gentrification of an area does the same thing, where it's the opposite. The area gets gentrified and people get thrown out of the neighborhood because they can no longer afford to stay there. There's hatred and jealousy there too. So I thought it was a very strong presentation of a real life situation.
Go ahead.
There were things that I didn't feel were fully explained, but it was okay because you could do without full explanation of who all these people were, but that was okay because you got the overall message.
Well, I think it's very nuanced with the characters that you did get to know. And even the guys, the pub guys had
Well,
some.
you got to know the pub guys, and you got to know TJ and his wife, who wasn't too sure if this was a good thing.
His wife? TJ was divorced.
Whoever the woman was that was helping him.
Oh, that's Laura. She's the social worker.
She's
a Catholic social worker. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
she's a strong character too.
Yeah.
They had a bond. You're right.
Yeah.
What you just said reminds me of something Mayor Tom Bradley said in Los Angeles when mayor. Somebody approached him and they said, well, the Jews and the Germans have assimilated really well into this country. Why can't the black people? And I don't know what his internal reaction was, but he said, color. That's all. It's like we look different, and it's like so true. You become a scapegoat, just like the Jews now are becoming a scapegoat by the Palestinian protesters, of course.
But we scapegoated each other when when the Germans were here first, our own German
Right.
Jewish population, and they didn't want the Russians to come in.
Right. It's but
So
you
it
see,
happened.
everybody.
It's universal.
So my very first film job led to a supposed documentary series in Paris, looking at gypsies. You know, these are Yugoslavian migrants. This was back in the 70s and the 60s. And we found a gypsy family living in wagons with some livestock and a bear. They'd parade around the streets for money, with a hierarchy, with a grandfather and grandmother and the daughters and their husbands who married into it. Um, and they had a servant, and he was their slave, and he was in some way handicapped. And one night around the campfire, the servant brought around his slave, and there was somebody more impaired than he was.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's like, oh my God, look at this, and I can't say more than what I observed in the one night, because I never talked to the guy because I didn't know French. But my takeaway was everybody needs somebody of a lower caste. And by the way, somebody cited Wilkerson's book called Caste. Was that Martha Bergman? Yeah. So that was just made into a very mediocre movie by Ava DuVernay.
Mhm.
And you can watch it, but basically it's just she goes to other countries and she enlists some local to narrate the story of the caste system there. It's really boring, but it makes its point, so I can't say it shouldn't exist. I just think that she's extremely overrated. Excuse me if she has fans among us, but you try and watch 13th, about the 13th Amendment. That's kind of unwatchable as well. She just restates the obvious, I think, and does a good job of it. It's like there's a room for that in the culture, but I wish she'd go deeper. But that notion of caste, by the way, the other caste system was the Nazis. The
Yes.
Nazis were different because the Jews were white. Right. So this said, oh, it's not racial, it's ethnic, or it's not ethnic, it's economic caste. That was her reduction, and that's a very good point to make. In India, we had, all know about the untouchables, but there's another class above them called the Dalits. And Risa, maybe you can chime in, but together, the untouchables and the Dalits amount to 22% of the entire Indian population. 1 in 5. And these people have no chance of getting ahead. Some do, of course, but it's like, and the caste system is still very much in place in business, in family life, and in secular life, in the arts communities. By the way, I have to, as an aside, there's one film about the Jewish communities in India that I've been trying to get for years. And it was an American Jewish woman whose grandmother was Indian. And she wanted to go back and trace her grandmother's roots. And she goes back and she finds 3 different Jewish families that are from different castes. And it's a remarkable film. The lowest caste guy collects seeds from people and presses them for oil. And the middle guy, I forget what, the top guy was a computer programmer. This is like an early 90s movie, and it's so interesting. But we can get into that later, especially the Passover presentation I couldn't make because of the family issue. There's a big section on Indian culture in the Passover Haggadah. So we'll get to that next April or whenever Passover is. But it's so interesting how the parallels between cultures. And I had another thought, but let's go on. Who haven't we heard from? Charles Wool. Hi, Charles. Wool.
Hi, I really like the film a lot, and I'm not disagreeing with the reasons other people liked it, but to me, I felt that many times I was watching a documentary. The acting was really not acting. And to me, that added a lot to it. And the other thing I thought was the simplicity of bringing people together over food.
Yep.
And just getting them to sit down together. A, how well that worked, and B, the other, I think one of the important themes was the town itself had gone from a mining town to a town that was just basically on the brink of non-existing economically. And at the end, it brought it back to the old days when the town was really vibrant. So those are my thoughts.
They march together in the same gala celebration that TJ says, I don't go to that anymore. But and by the way, that banner that's brought out after her slideshow, there's Arabic writing at the bottom. So they didn't quite catch that or emphasize it enough as shot. They probably only had one shot to cover it.
Twice.
But when they're marching down the street, there's a panning shot across the bottom of the banner, and you see the Arabic writing. But unfortunately, you don't know it's the same banner. But that was a tough scene to cover. But it's a symbol, that they, Yara understood that the miners of '84 were struggling just like her own people are struggling today. And that's that common experience where when you finally understand someone well enough, then you realize they're not very different from you. Kimberly, you want to chime in?
Much better choice than that Japanese thing you picked.
Oh, you're just an action movie fan.
Anyway, I love the movie. I didn't see the real character development, though, of the main character, the man. He was empathetic from the beginning. It didn't, we don't know how he got that way or if he had been that way many years ago. That would have been interesting to know. The scene I could have done without was when they killed the dog and you heard the dog scream, because that sent me off crying and distracted me from the rest of the movie. So I thought that was more of a distraction. And then as far as the earlier discussion about white flight, what Blacks never understood about white flight was if one family moves into the neighborhood, if the rest of you don't move out,
right,
can't take no one, but one family moves in and everybody goes running. So it's like you create the problem. And as far as I just want to tell a quick story about the tea set. When my grandmother was a baby, they were being run out of Tennessee, middle of the night, and they heard that people were coming with, the flames, and they were going to burn the house down. And my grandmother's grandmother they were throwing stuff on the wagon to get out of there. And my grandmother's told her son, go back, you've got to get the platter. You've got to get the platter. And he ran back into the house and he brought this platter out that she then carried on her lap with my grandmother sitting on the platter for the whole
wow.
I now have the platter.
Oh, wow.
That platter was that important to her. And she said, I don't care about anything else but get my platter. And we bring it out every year at Thanksgiving. So yeah, there's sometimes you just get something that,
that means something to you. No, it's important. Doris, you want to add anything now? I think we've all spoken.
I do want to just say that those who get to take out platters or tea sets are lucky refugees.
Yeah.
There are plenty.
You speak from personal experience.
I speak from personal experience of people who got to take nothing.
Yeah. Doris, you want to add anything? If not, we'll go to, Betty.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, speaking of cultures that we think of as very different that have so many similarities, Muslim, I'm always struck by how so many things are similar. Obviously there's some things that are very different with Muslims and Jews. And I remember once, it was years ago, I heard they had a Brandeis University talk, and he was trying to get Jews and Arabs to get to know each other. So he had arranged a program where he gave scholarships to people coming from Israel and I don't know, whatever Muslim countries, and he said the Jews and the Arabs bonded over food because they're their food, restrictions, and, with the religion were similar. And so they were eating, the kosher and halal food were similar. And so they bonded over that. But I've also, sometimes when I've seen, at museums or whatever, and they're talking about some of the Arab history, I mean, there's so many, there's a common beginning, and there are just so many similarities, but still, I don't know. I think the fighting will go on forever, or I hope
Yeah.
not, but
Well, there's a reason Islam is considered an Abrahamic religion, along with Judaism.
yeah.
And I believe that there's so much that's shared between the Quran and the Torah. It's
Yeah, I know.
remarkable. If only the Palestinian protesters would acknowledge that, But I don't mean to defend the violence against women and children either. So again, this comes back to nuance, and Jeffrey's more expert than I at teaching nuance. But this is what it takes. You have to hold two conflicting ideas in your head at the same time, and it's not inhuman. We're hardwired to do that. It just takes a little getting used to and education. Barbara Goldman, I didn't call on you, but do you want to share something with us? You can say
Jim,
no.
Rose Rose was raising hand and you didn't call her.
I will get to that. So,
Okay.
Barbara,
I
you're in.
there. So I've been noodling this idea about the young woman and the camera and how the film starts off that way. And because it took me aback that she was so confident and that she was so determined in this new setting with not knowing anybody. And when you look at the members of her family and the other immigrants, she seemed distinctly more westernized, let's say.
Yes, right.
So when I kept trying to figure out whether that was disconcerting to me or what it represented in terms of the film. And I thought she was I lost my train of thought. It's a shame because as I said, I was new.
Let me chime in and you can come back in.
Okay, if I think of it, I'll come back to it.
If her mother coming off the bus had been harassed by somebody who knocked her purse off her arm, or, the mother would have just with dignity and sucked it up, gathered her purse from the ground and walked off.
Right.
This woman is a modern Syrian woman, and she volunteered in the camps, you see, and that's how she learned English. She even taught herself English.
That's exactly what I was going to say is that.
So she's built a different stuff. She's a more modern Muslim woman. And for her, it's respect and dignity. These are her core values. And, a pillar, they say Islam has 7 pillars, and some of the pillars are just like Judaism: welcome the stranger, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the ill. It's like these are shared values. And this woman is more like a Reformed Jew. It's not about Allah with her. It's about how can I help people, my own people first, and how can I bring people together? Because that's what we're missing in this town. It's often said that the best people to tell a culture about itself is the immigrant, the outsider. They bring the most perspective because we don't see ourselves from a worldview. Most Americans have not traveled abroad. So, and I'm sure you found this from the international people you've met and befriended. And Risa, you're a world traveler. I know, that's not news to you from a life of travel. And Marina, the same way. When you first came to this country, Marina, did you know many Americans? Did you know what to expect? I know you're educated and an academic, so I'm not saying you were naive, but what did you perceive?
First, we came for a visit. We had relatives here who invited us. So when we came to live here, some 4 years later, it was not such a huge culture shock, but it still was a huge culture shock. So we already knew some of America. We were already visited it, but the culture shock was immense.
Okay. Well, one of my personal work projects is about the Jewish artist from Poland named Arthur Szyk, who did the Szyk Haggadah. And after the state of Israel, his project was to be integration. And he started very early in the 1940s when he learned that the American army was segregated into black units and white units. You've heard of the Tuskegee Airmen, but there were others. In the Civil War, there were black units fighting for the North. And he went on a personal campaign and he did a series of illustrations, 4 illustrations that were sponsored by the Secretary of Labor. And he didn't like the content of them, so he censored them and he didn't permit them to be released. One was a Christian man, a Hebrew person, and a black person building a tank together. Right? So community working for a common cause. Another was a black GI soldier is walking with a white GI soldier, and there's a defeated Nazi general walking behind them at gunpoint. And the white soldier says to the black soldier, "What would you do with Hitler?" And the black soldier says, "I'd drop him anywhere in the United States."
Oh,
Yeah. And it was like he should experience what I've experienced in this culture. So, nothing is like the lived experience. And there was another one I can't recall, but it was this outsider. The man came to America in 1940, and he's doing cartoons like that, political cartoons during the war for 5 years. And he has that kind of insight into American character and American values and American ignorance even. So my point is the outsider has a lot to tell us about ourselves. But the outsider is never appreciated for their viewpoint because they're less than us, as these people were considered. Does anybody, Roz, you haven't chimed in. Not that it's just chiming in, Roz. We want to hear what you have to say.
Oh, I love the movie. It was very, very endearing and powerful for me. But I was thinking to myself that the townspeople showed a lot of fear of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And Yarrow showed no fear. She was able to, have a relationship with, what's his name?
TJ, Tommy John.
She knew how to work it and not run away from, adverse territory. She knew how to really do what she wanted to do, and she made a big impact.
Look, the year of the film is 2016. I guess that's when Syria was going crazy. And so when was she born? 96? Oh my God, it's so late, right? 86, she's not more than 30. So this is a modern woman. And even though she comes from Syria, her father was a tailor, so that tells you working class, maybe secure, but not rich. And her time in the camp where she volunteered with European and English-speaking nurses really was probably a great part of her added sophistication. She found in that culture, even though it was in the camp, the culture of caring, of educated people, especially educated women who had some authority. You can just imagine what it was like for an outgoing and intelligent woman who was, 20 something, to be exposed to all these role models in the camp. So I accepted her. I didn't feel that she was too special or too brilliant or too well-spoken, her fierceness, by the way, confronting that guy was, she felt like a Middle Easterner to me, if I can stereotype Middle Easterners when they get pissed off. They let you have it. She is not shy about an outrage. Think of the film we saw years ago, which we've loved, called The Insult, about the Christian Lebanese citizen and the Palestinian construction supervisor. And they have an argument over the gutter on the guy's balcony and it becomes this national trial. And it's all about seeing the other side as an equal and appreciating their point of view. And at the end of the film, you should see it again. It's called The Insult. It's a brilliant, brilliant film. After the trial, I won't tell you who wins and who loses. The two guys go outside the courtroom and they kind of smile at each other, because an apology was made in the courtroom. And that's all either one of them wanted was just one side to say, I'm sorry, because their dignity was at stake. Their sense of themselves, their right to being human is tied up in I'm sorry. And please apologize for your wrong. And it's such a little thing. And yet the whole country went nuts for it. It's a fiction film. But the example is great that it doesn't take much to touch the same nerve in someone else. I should see that again. Fern?
Yeah, I think that the fact that Yara was so brave, I think that not all of it is due to the fact that she's modern. I think some people are brave. It's rare. And if you look at the Holocaust, you see that some people, very simple people,
yeah,
very few, but very significant, simple people simply are braver than other people. They're braver, they're more decent, and they're extraordinary examples of light and humanity.
Right. That goes for the Germans and the Czechs and Hungarians who sheltered Jews.
And the French and
all of them.
It was very rare, but there were people, farmers and priests and people who did it. And those people just have my mother hid my father in a wall, and then he lived in the sewer, and she fed a lot of family and so on at great risk to her life. And she said she just wasn't really afraid. She just wasn't. And
because of those other, she afraid for herself because she was doing what she
just wasn't. She says she doesn't know why. She just did it. And she said, you never knew in advance who was going to do these things and who weren't. And it just happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this woman, she was nervy. She was brave.
Mm-hmm. So you're allowed. I mean, you're allowed to have a character like that in a naturalistic film like this. She was exceptional.
Yes, she was.
So if nobody has anything more to chime in, I'd like to review a couple of the really important scenes in the film. Oh, the ballsiness. She finds the guy with his soccer shirt on and she confronts him on the street, pay for my camera. That's bravery. And but in that scene, she realizes that TJ really did know the guy. When she asks for help, he says, I don't know him. And and so it's it makes him a little more multidimensional. He wasn't a goody two shoes from the day one. Yeah, he defended them and isolated her from the bullies outside the bus, but he just didn't want to get involved. As he said when the pub buddies, started ranting against the immigrants and how the whole country's going to hell and the town's dying. He didn't get involved in those discussions, and eventually they nail him for it. And there's a fight scene later on that we can get to, but he keeps the lid on. He's a very suppressed man. He's kept his head down because that's his job in the town. Pubs are supposed to be a safe space. Not that this one was, but he does not want to get involved because he has to serve both kinds of people. And unfortunately, it's only two kinds of people in this. Although I have to say, there was kind of a heavy-set guy in the pub who took the side of the Syrians. They're not so bad, or no, I don't want to do that, or and the woman with the short hair, she is as nasty as some of the men. So it's like this is everybody's fair game in this to be good or bad, But I'd like to go over some of the scenes. A little filmmaking thing that you should be aware of in this movie is particularly sensitive. The music. He takes her in the back room, and she sees the photos of the strike and the miners. and she's moved by them. Again, it's in this silent close-up of her where it touches something in her. And he tells her about the gala they have every year and the strike in 84. And then he offers to fix her camera. So again, there's this outreach from him to her, which she didn't expect. She was willing to let it go that he knew the guy. But this is a voluntary gesture from him instead of an evasive one, like his denying he knew the guy. I thought that was very telling. And it makes him more real. So he had to be won over as well. And what wins him over is her understanding of the people in the pictures, which his uncle had taken with those cameras. And in a way, the back room is a museum to better times.
Mhm.
And even the miners themselves, the pub guys say, we meant something because there was strength in numbers and it was a great time for us. We improved our lot. But it was a failed promise because look at us now. Now, I know there's a bunch of us here who came of age in the 60s. And we said, oh my God, the Civil Rights Movement law passed and the Voting Rights Act passed and the war against poverty happened. And we had some hope coming out of the 60s and ending the Vietnam War that things might get better.
Mhm.
And don't we feel that we've been betrayed now
Yes.
because of the regressive? Okay, and that you don't all have to agree with me, but to me, it's like, are we fighting the same battles all over again? We are. These, as my wife says, I quote her all the time, these people have come out from under a rock, the rocks they've lived in for decades, and Trump gave them license to be as awful as they want to be. But you see, that's also the hatred of the other, the need for revenge, the need to feel superior, to make up for your own fears and inadequacy and insecurity, because the white people in town were just as insecure as the Syrians. There were very, there was unemployment. There was, it was going downhill and they all knew it. And they had no recourse, no other place to go. So they stayed in their 5,000 pound apartment. So the music, when she's looking at the photos, the music comes in and it carries over into the next scene. But that's the theme, is this is a museum. And in the next scene, TJ delivers a mattress and then another delivery. And there's a grumpy neighbor whom we don't see again. I don't think we saw him at the supposed condolence call. He witnesses them delivering goods to the Syrian family. He says, why don't you take care of your own first? Well, again, as he's otherizing the Syrians, and I thought that was important. And he's the one who bangs on the wall to disturb the family all the time. And here's a very important comment. I think it's Yara who says, these guys seem to wind each other up. Right? Remember that line? And it's so, that's what a Trump rally is like. If you've ever read the context, it's like, excuse me, Hitler at a Leni Riefenstahl filmed rally. It's hideous. He ramps that crowd up, pulls them up, whips them into a frenzy. And, I have to admit, and maybe somebody else can chime in, it's like a religious fervor.
Sure.
And a lot of religious services, especially among the fundamentalist sects, beliefs, cultures, people they fall down and they speak in tongues, and it's like they're so worked up. And these manipulators have found a way to get under people's skin, to find that button that will make them feel comfortable with their own sorry lot in life. And they cling for that. That's so, look, you can't blame people. Like, let's face it. Democrats didn't do enough to assuage the fears and the sense of persecution of the white, unemployed 60-year-old farmer who lost his farm. He felt betrayed by the nation after his lifetime of work and his family's legacy on the land that he had to sell. So these are legitimate grievances. Why they went in the way they went to follow this reactionary movement and this us versus them kind of attitude, that's a different story. But the central grievance was not addressed even during the Obama administration, and not, it was the Democrats were sleeping, and so were we as liberal West Siders. We didn't make a big enough stink about it. No matter how many issues of the New York Times I read, or the LA Times, it didn't make me take any more action. You just complained about the Proud Boys and the awful people that were there. But never, you have to look, it's just like we want people to look at the nuance in our lives. We have to look at the nuance in their lives and understand that the haters are suffering. We don't know what the hurt is. It's probably different in each person. It's more than my grandpappy hated the income tax collector, and I do too, and the government's taking it away from us, and he's always serving other people. It's like, it's not that kind of atavistic. I heard this when I was a kid, and that's how my family always believed. It's you have to treat the hurt, and we have not addressed the hurt in all peoples. Now, there are some people starving, whose needs must be addressed, and not learning how to read, before the people, who are very conservative and following a certain candidate, because they have food in their mouths and they have land. They don't look at how lucky they are. Not that they should be grateful because they lost their land or their jobs. I'm not saying that. But there's so many other people in worse shape. And there always have been, despite how we've eradicated so-called poverty in this country. I don't care. But I'm ranting. So let's move on with the movie, because we all share that. And here's something. The young boys are jealous of the girl who gets the bicycle. It's jealousy. Why don't we get anything?
Yeah.
And the guy, TJ tries to tell them, well, you have a family, and you have stuff. Your family's lived here for years, and you have food. These people have nothing. And I don't want to say they're privileged teens, because they're not, but they don't know how lucky they are, because their parents don't know how lucky they are. Entitlement is what you're used to having, deservedly or not. And when you see somebody else you feel doesn't deserve it, you get angry. So that was a lesson, that the teens are jealous. And then there's a young boy, this wasn't developed enough, who's afraid to go in and get some food because he's hungry, because his parents or uncles would see him dining with the Syrians. So they feed him in the kitchen. That was a very touching thing, how, there's a generational divide there as well. And his shame at being seen with the Syrians it was palpable. And then
Jim, maybe he was ashamed that his family didn't have food. It wasn't clear why he was ashamed.
Well,
why he was scared to come in.
Other families didn't have food either, like Linda, the sick girl who goes into, her blood sugar drops so low. The mother is humiliated because the Muslim young woman, Yara, found her refrigerator was empty. That's hard to swallow for somebody who's scraped and tried to feed their family for decades. Single mom, obviously. And it's hard to swallow. And in the heat of the moment, she rails against her as a foreigner, because the foreigner touched the nerve and pointed to what's missing in her own life. Not because she failed, because the system failed her. But to her, it's like, my daughter goes into sugar shock because I can't feed her properly. So that's what I mean about our buttons are very close to the surface. And when they get touched by a foreigner, it's like we blame them as the cause, instead of, they just made me feel something I need to look at, or see in a different light. And then again, here's another cultural thing. Without being asked, Yara and her mother bring food to TJ after the dog is killed. It's like Shiva. Words don't do it. Just eat. And that's when the conversation about TJ's attempted suicide happens, when he retells the story of the dog. So you see how these gestures for which you expect nothing produce results that yield something for you as the comforting person, and helps the grieving person as well, because it breaks the wall down. Suddenly, we understand your grief, TJ. Our husband and father's in jail, in prison, and we haven't seen him in a year, and we're worried as hell about him. We know about loss. We lost our home. So it's all over this film. Every scene has something that contradicts the one before, or the next one, or that reflects upon it. It's just lovely in its structure and its sensitivity. And somebody else mentioned this. These people felt like they were in your living room. It felt like a documentary because they had the sense, and the director had the sense, as he always does, not to over dramatize, to keep these people real. And sure, they break down and cry sometimes, but they also snap out of it quickly. When Yara learns her father's dead, she's not hysterical all the time. She breaks the grief to greet TJ when he shows up for her. And she's actually smiling through her grief at him.
Jim, weren't many of the actors non-actors, non-professionals?
I think most of them were.
Yeah.
I suspect the two leads were not.
Right.
But this is naturalism. I mean, we
Yeah.
see films like this all the time, and that's one of the secrets of this film. It underplays its hand. If you see big movie stars playing roles in families like this, it's and the lighting's perfect. There's another thing about this film. There's very little added lighting. It doesn't look like a movie. It looks like some guy with a camera went outside and watched the truck going away with the sunlight is bright on the side of the truck and the other side's really dark and it doesn't matter. Similarly, people's faces go dark sometimes because we only need to see half of it. It's light coming in through a window and no other source. It's a way of keeping it real. You don't even know that you're being manipulated. It's still a Hollywood movie, but they're intentionally leaving it raw or more raw than you're used to seeing because they want to keep it not special, but relatable. And then there's this moment that sets up the ending where the brother is watching the suffering in Syria on the internet and then gets called to the living room for the news that father's still alive, and they embrace. And then there's a really important scene where they're going to church to pick up a donation, and she wanders in and she sees the choir. First, she's wondering at the splendor of this 1,000-year-old church. She's probably been in a mosque that was 1,000 years old or close to it. And again, she's relating to the Catholic institution because it's so similar to her mosque with the high ceilings and the windows. And even some of the artwork on the columns, the patterns are very Muslim, but Islamic, I should say. But she's very moved to tears, and she comes running back, not running, but it changes her. Again, this is not identification through confrontation or shared work. It's through a shared connection through personal discovery, like her looking at the photographs on the wall. It deepens her connection to the culture she's been thrown into. And she says to TJ, being here, its beauty makes me want to hope. Right? Well, isn't that the function of most religion? One of the main functions? To give people the sense that better is possible, if not better for the person who wronged you, but better for the world or better for yourself. It's not, I don't say an egocentric better or a hope for yourself, but hope for the future. And she says, when the world does nothing, that's when it hurts the most. And we've seen a lot of films here where, they've condemned the silent collaborators of the Nazi era. The silence killed more people than the soldiers because the other people let it happen. And we see it, I just indicted Democrats for the last 30 years for not addressing a need that's come back to bite them in the butt, because they didn't see it. And then the flood happens. We see this great community effort to get the kitchen into shape. And here's where some of the common dog whistles come out. The pub guys are angry because he won't give them the back room for a rally, because it's a rally, it's a hate rally, and he knows it, but he won't do it. And his excuse is, I have no insurance for it. So, So after the back room is ruined, the pub guys blame the Arab, the Syrians, and they say, our people. They're wrecking this town for our people. It means the others are to blame. And that's we do see, you hear it today. My own son, I don't know where he got this. I've said this before. He said, oh yeah, she's one of ours. My father referred to it as triple O's, well, one of ours. But he, immigrated here as a 5-year-old boy in 1920 and lived in the Jewish haunts of Cleveland. And the Jews stuck together because they had to against the other ethnic minorities. But I never used that term. So where did my son get it? I don't know. And I was a little embarrassed because one of ours is like, well, it only goes so far, but let's face it, we're all talking here together, and that says something about our comfort level. It makes you wonder. But then when he learns that it was sabotage, right? That Charlie pried open the window so they could loosen the joints on the water pipes. So when the water pressure rose, it would leak and destroy things. Charlie doesn't believe it. TJ doesn't believe it. And he confronts him in a doorway, which, talk about bravery. And Charlie says, it can't be. TJ says, it can't be, Charlie. Our dads died together. His dad was in the same mining accident. And he goes and confronts him. And this is just the kind of guy he is. He still contains his anger. And he says, I know. He won't say, you did it, but he says, I know. And lets that percolate. That's a great way of making somebody to realize how bad they acted. You don't accuse them, you let them know that they acted badly. And then he goes back to the pub and he gets into the shoving match. They say, come on, you can do this. And he says, hate, lies, corruption, betrayal. Betrayal sets his colleagues off, Laura and the 2 other people that were there. But hate, lies, corruption, oh my God, that's today, isn't it? And the time he yells at them, and he won't tell them what he means by betrayal. So he's such a good guy, he won't even turn in the people who harmed him. But he's quitting. He tells Laura he wants it over, and he goes to the shore, looking for his dad or trying to kill himself again. And then he hears Laura, like the dog, calling to him from the hillside, I have some news. And it's Yara's dad is dead. So what pulls him out of his suicidal thoughts? Again, it's the connection to somebody else, as the dog was. The first time he said, what would my dad think of me if I killed myself? But the dog, and he says, I'm not a religious man, but the dog was a sign. But he gets out of his suicidal thoughts by loving the dog and saving the dog. And when Laura tells him that Yara's dad is dead, he loses those thoughts and he has to come to her aid because she means something to him. He is forced into action. So that's a moral choice he's making. I'm leaving my self-indulgent self-pity aside, and I'm going to try and comfort somebody who means something to me. And then she insists he comes in. And then he sits Shiva with all the Arab people there with the teacups. And then there's the great scene. This is the smartest thing. Somebody's at the door, they open the door, and the town is there. I mean, wow. That's just brilliant. I mean, it probably moved other people to tears as well. And then they kept coming and coming, down the street with flowers. And the last lines in the film are, Yara says, shukran, thank you to him, and pats her heart, and he pats his heart and says shukran to her. They saved each other. Lovely film. And then the last scene is marching down with a banner with Arabic writing on it. So this film just, what can I say? Doing less is sometimes more because it allows us, the audience, to be participants more in the story. We don't have to say, oh, I'm not as good looking as Tom Cruise, I could never have her. We have to say, God, he's not very attractive, but he's a sensitive guy. I could like him. It's like it allows us, the viewer, the space to put ourselves into those roles more because it's not pretentious. It doesn't shout anything. It's just a quietly paced, deliberately paced, knowingly paced movie that just does wonders on us. Cindy?
So should we assume that the town comes together to fix the back room and they resume the meals again?
Well, you did see some of the evildoers marching in the parade, but you don't know if that healed enough wounds. But it ends with hope, like the cathedral. There's a possibility of something being better, and that's what you need to pull yourself out of it. The point is not that it's going to improve everything, but there was this outpouring of sympathy and empathy with her of the townspeople.
Did
I
I miss like where they got all the food to feed the town?
In the earlier scene?
Yeah.
There was people kept dropping off food, so it was like a potluck. Everybody brought something to be prepared for everybody else that night. And the guys in the pub, excuse me, Marina, the guys in the pub witnessed the parade of Pakis, Pakistanis, as the Brits would say, dropping off food, and say, the town isn't ours anymore. The pub isn't ours anymore.
The union was also providing.
The union and the church provided stuff.
Church.
Yeah, and they even cursed the union, who helped them through the strike in '84. But now that they're unemployed, they hate the union because the union is why they're unemployed. It couldn't be because coal is dirty and bad for people, and even in 2016, as solar and wind power were rapidly becoming less expensive than coal. And it's an obsolete technology. I mean, coal's been around for centuries for heating, but the British Industrial Revolution was coal-based, steam engines. I'm sorry, did I cut you off, Marina? No. Okay, so time to wrap it up. Any final comments? I'm so glad you guys got something out of it. I thought it was just one of these understated films that just knocks it out of the park. Like many of the Asian films, unlike Perfect Days for some people, this wasn't quite that minimalist. But we have seen, remember a film we saw called The Photograph, an Indian film about a young man who asks an upper class girl to masquerade as his girlfriend because his grandmother's coming to town. And then the same director did The Sense of an Ending, about a Oxford scandal that comes back to knock this guy in the face when he realizes that the love child of his ex-girlfriend and her boyfriend then had Down syndrome, and suddenly it all became clear to him. Lovely, sensitive films. I asked one of my students who was Indian, I don't know that he was from Delhi or not, and I said, Asian filmmakers, and this goes for Koreans and Japanese and Taiwanese, I said, there's an understated quality to their films. They don't say a lot, but you feel a lot. What is that all about? What's your theory? And he told me, he said, well, we love our parents so much. We have to find ways of being critical of them without saying it directly. It's funny, but if you think about it, that's a great skill to learn. I wish I had it. So, in this country, it's like, be open with your kids, tell them you're disappointed or, whatever, and encourage your kids to share how they feel about you, but no. So even that kind of unspoken, as my own immigrants' parents and their grandparents did, they didn't talk about emotions, and I mean, my grandfathers and grandmothers were born in 1888. So it's like, and children were meant to be seen and not heard, and they weren't adults yet. And we adults didn't talk about emotions because it wasn't dignified. Again, we weren't wealthy, but we wanted to claim to be dignified. So it's like, can I say the spiral of history is a spiral, and hopefully we move upwards a little bit. So let's talk about the future. A bunch of good films are coming online that I've been threatening you with. This was one of them. You all know who Mike Nichols was, an immigrant, Jewish guy. Did extremely fine films, worked with Elaine May. And I started watching May's movies. Elaine May was a comedian when there were very few, maybe Molly Goldberg and Carol Burnett in her younger years, or Elaine May, she wrote the Ishtar and Shampoo, and she was a 70s writer.
That they have a
Well,
special deal going on.
she wrote this terrific film, probably her best script, and it's called Primary Colors, and it's about an election. Fern's shaking her head. The character is a Southern governor who becomes president, this Bill Clinton, and he was a womanizer as well. And Kathy Bates is in it, and so many great actors are in this film. It's powerful and it's so relevant. Oh, I just watched it the other day. I loved it. It's so relevant. It could have been ripped from today's headlines, and we'll definitely see that. I don't know. Should I spill the beans and schedule it now, or should I wait till election season when we're good and riled up? I know you'll accept it anytime, but I'm going to time it. Maybe we'll delay that. But Primary Colors is definitely in our future. And there's also a film coming starring Jason Schwartzman as a cantor, and Carol Kane as his bat mitzvah student.
Oh.
Except she's 40 years older than he is, or 30, and it's like, I don't know if they have a romance or what, but I got a screener for it. It's going to hit the theaters soon. And, I hope it's good enough to show you. But it certainly brings a chuckle when I describe it. They were very discreet in their description of what happens between them. So I don't know, but sounds interesting. And there are any number of others. I really don't like waving okay, I can't even, I have a list here of, I'll share another, because if we're not going to do Primary Colors next, you want to know what some likely candidates are. I like showing my dirty laundry to people. It makes me feel like I'm connecting. My computer would open the damn file up. Okay, I'm not going to get it. I'm not going to get it. Okay, but I promise you something good, different. But this film's one to really tell people about. It's online now. I didn't even think it was available, because on Thursday, I think I noticed online that it became available suddenly. So I jumped on it. That's why you got such an early notice about this film, most of you. Joel, say hi to Mitch. Tell him we missed him. And Martha, thanks for joining us. I hope you come back.
I would love to. Thank you for letting me come in.
Oh, it's fine. Now we're only going to do one film a month this summer. I need a break. And I don't know what the future holds. Has anybody been to an event at what was once called still is called the Gray Family Chapel on the Resnick campus? I know Martha and Betty, you can't come. You're always welcome. Stay with us if you want, but it's just around the corner. It's really lovely. And it's still a work in progress. The screen is too small, it's too high, the sound isn't in, but it's a lovely place. We had the Levees of Monticello screening there. And people are very comfortable for that. Charles, you were there. Charles Wool, there you are. And we're threatening to have some events there. I don't know if it'll be Thursday nights. Fortunately, Wilshire has the budget to pay for security if we have an evening event, unlike university, which limited us to religious school hours. So we'll see. I promise a bright future. The cathedral gave me hope. The film gave me hope. And I'll see you in a month, and you'll hear from me before then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Jim. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Nice to see everyone.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Thanks a lot. It was really interesting.
Mm.